Tom Holland has reached that rare creative tier where his reactions carry weight not because he's loud about them, but because he's careful. He's an actor shaped by franchises, by expectation, by the strange pressure of growing up inside global storytelling. When someone like that responds to a film like Moana 2026, it doesn't feel like noise, it feels like calibration. Like someone quietly adjusting the compass on where big cinema is headed next. What stood out immediately wasn't excitement in the usual sense, it was recognition, the kind that comes from someone who understands what it costs to return to a story that already means something to millions. Holland didn't frame Moana 2026 as a sequel trying to be bigger. He treated it as a continuation trying to be deeper, and that distinction mattered. At one point, he summed it up simply: it feels earned. That wasn't tossed out casually. It carried the implication that the film didn't chase nostalgia or spectacle for reassurance. Instead, it trusted its audience to grow alongside it. Holland's commentary leaned into how rare that trust has become in modern blockbusters, how often studios mistake scale for substance. In his view, Moana 2026 refuses that shortcut. What resonated most with him was the film's sense of emotional maturity, not darkness, not heaviness, but clarity. The story understands who Moana is now, and more importantly, who she isn't anymore. Holland reflected on how difficult that transition is for any long-running character, especially one introduced to audiences at a formative age. Growth can feel like betrayal if handled poorly. Here, it feels inevitable. He spoke about how the film allows silence to carry meaning, about moments that don't explain themselves immediately. That choice, to let emotion breathe without instruction, struck him as confident filmmaking. It reminded him of the difference between entertainment that demands attention and storytelling that earns it. There was clear respect in how he talked about the cast, not as a collection of performances, but as a shared responsibility. He noted how the voices behind these characters don't sound like they're returning to roles. They sound like they're continuing conversations. The performances feel inhabited, not repeated. That distinction mattered to him, especially as someone who knows how easily a returning role can slip into autopilot. Holland highlighted the weight carried by the actors grounding the film's cultural core. He didn't frame it as representation for applause, but as stewardship. The cast isn't borrowing from culture to decorate the story, they're carrying it forward. There's an understanding, he suggested, that authenticity isn't about accuracy alone, it's about intention, and intention shows up in the smallest choices. Another quiet remark lingered longer than expected. You can feel the work. Not the polish, not the budget, the work. He was talking about the cumulative effort behind animation that doesn't rush emotion, writing that resists simplification, and performances that prioritize truth over charm. As someone who's lived inside green screens and production timelines, Holland's appreciation felt informed. He wasn't reacting as a fan alone, but as a craftsman recognizing other craftspeople pushing themselves. When discussing the scale of Moana 2026, Holland avoided the usual language of spectacle. He didn't dwell on visuals or ambition in abstract terms. Instead, he framed scale as emotional reach. The story isn't larger because the world is bigger, it's larger because the questions are. Identity, responsibility, legacy. These themes aren't introduced as lessons, they exist as pressure points, and that, he implied, is why the film stays with you. He seemed particularly struck by how the narrative treats leadership, not as destiny, but as negotiation. Moana isn't elevated above others, she's embedded among them. That choice reframes heroism as listening rather than conquering. Holland noted how refreshing it was to see a story trust its protagonist enough to let her doubt without diminishing her strength. There was also an undercurrent in his reaction that felt personal. Growing up under global attention, he understands what it means to have an identity shaped by expectation. His commentary subtly connected that experience to Moana's journey, how the film acknowledges the burden of being seen as a symbol while still allowing the character to remain human. He didn't overpraise. That restraint made his words land harder. When he said the film knows why it exists, it sounded less like admiration and more like relief. as if he's been waiting for stories that don't justify themselves with irony or excess, but with purpose. What makes Holland's reaction matter isn't his fame, it's his position within the same ecosystem. He's part of the generation of actors navigating legacy franchises, evolving audiences, and the constant tension between art and expectation. His response to Moana 2026 reads like a quiet endorsement of a different path forward, one where returning to a beloved story isn't about reclaiming attention, but about honoring growth. The film doesn't ask viewers to remember who Moana was, it assumes they do. Instead, it asks whether they're ready to meet who she's becoming. Holland seemed to believe that audiences are more ready than studios often assume. And that belief carries weight. Because when someone who understands the machinery behind modern cinema pauses, reflects, and chooses thoughtful admiration over hype, it signals something shifting. Not just for Moana 2026, but for how stories can evolve without losing their soul. If this is what careful continuation looks like, if this is how legacy can mature rather than repeat, then the real question isn't whether Moana 2026 will meet expectations, it's whether future films will dare to trust their stories this much.